Kyle Forrest, US Future of HR Leader at Deloitte Consulting.
In 2025, 75% of workers wanted more stability because of all the change happening in organizations, big change. 85% of executives wanted more agile teams, right?
Yeah.
And that feels like it's in conflict. We started using a zero-based work framing to say, if I take all the work off the table and I assign it a value and start to put it back in, I should be asking, should this work exist? The leaders who are going to be the best at navigating through this moment in time are going to be the ones who do not wrap their arms around and try to hold things tight. They're going to open their arms and say, we are willing to share. We're willing to give up or disrupt our space.
What is the test you run on a vendor demo to decide whether you're looking at a real agent or a workflow with a chat interface?
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I'm Julius. I'm the host of this show. I wanted to ask one small favor of you all, and it's to follow us or subscribe wherever you listen. It's the best way to support the show, and that's how we're able to keep doing these fantastic interviews. Thanks in advance for doing so, and let's get on with the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Tech Wolf podcast. And today I'm joined by Kyle Forrest. Kyle is the US Future of HR Leader at Deloitte Consulting. He's also the Dean of Deloitte's Next Generation CHRO Academy and one of the authors behind several reports, among which the 2026 Global Human Capital Trends Report, and also the paper HR Reimagines Agentic AI for HR. Kyle, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Excited to be here. I have certainly had a pleasure getting to know the Tech Wolf team over the last year and change, couple of years maybe at this point, and really looking forward to trading some insights today.
Awesome. Well, now you can add one more face to the people at Tech Wolf, you know. That's I'm sure it's a long list in the meantime already. Cool. Hey, let's kick off this episode the way I kick off all episodes, which is with a question from the previous guest. We always like to connect these episodes by the questions of the guests themselves. And this one is from Kendra Angier, the CHRO of Cotality, formerly known as CoreLogic, one of our Tech Wolf customers, and she was very curious to learn from you. And actually, either you can take here your own stance or from examples you've seen across the industry. But what is it that you're doing to maintain continuity and start knowledge transfer to prepare for the natural churn that we're going to see, especially in our millennial and baby boomer generations? And this question came after a discussion about the entry-level roles, but she wants to talk also about the roles leaving the organization. So curious to get your take there, Kyle.
Yeah. When I saw that question, I loved it because actually over the last year and change, when I've been invited to talk to a number of organizations around AI as something that has been like this overwhelming headline for the last few years, I try to the extent that I can to weave in other trends in the world of work, one of which is demographics, right? So you noted in the frame of the question, right? Natural churn with millennial and baby boomer generations, right? So in the next 3.5 years, every baby boomer will get to 65 plus, which is retirement age in the US. Retirement age is earlier in other countries, right? So, but we're going to see that whole generation have reached a retirement age. And they're not all going to keep working, right? And if they do keep working, they're not going to be working Monday to Friday, 8 to 5, 9 to 5, whatever the work schedule is in the respective country that they live in. So organizations do need to prepare. And at the other end of the spectrum, many countries are seeing that the incoming generations are smaller, right? Yeah. And so, and work has changed, right? So I think it's a really important question because it acknowledges all the dynamics that have to get addressed by companies to continue to navigate the world of work going forward. But so maybe to answer the question explicitly, either what am I doing personally or what do I see organizations doing in the market? And I'll start with a little bit of what I see organizations doing in the market. There's an acknowledgement that much of what happens in the world of work is undocumented, right? I think there's been this new terminology in the last year and a half, work intelligence and task intelligence, right?
Hmm.
Which is there are work activities that people do throughout the day, throughout the week to, get work done. And a lot of that is not captured in a job description, right? And it doesn't live in the standard operating procedures or the process documents or other things, right?
Hmm.
So what do I see many organizations doing is actually documenting knowledge, right? How does somebody do their work at a lower level of detail than exists today? Um, all sorts of things. And uniquely, I think this is where AI has a tremendous power, right? And I've actually seen a couple of companies start up with a focus explicitly on knowledge transfer, right? How do we
Yeah.
go, get something to shadow an employee or in those periods of knowledge transfer to actually document how they get work done. Now, so that's a kind of a broad framing of how you're actually now documenting the way work gets done, the knowledge needed to get work done. What I'm doing individually is I would say similar, but what I'm trying to actually do is some much more intentional. Um, Getting, whenever I go work with clients, with leaders within Deloitte, et cetera, uh, bring someone with me, right?
Hmm.
Whereas in the past, it might have been just me going to a meeting. I need to intentionally bring people with me so that they're involved with the prep, they're involved with the meeting, they're involved with the follow through, right? Because it's one thing to hand someone knowledge that you have documented, and
Hmm.
it's another to help them with the lived experience of seeing that knowledge applied in action, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that's where people have the concern of, are we using AI to help entry level workers to acquire the knowledge, or are they going to acquire experience in how to use that knowledge, right? Judgment, discernment, some of those other human skills that people focus on. So that's
Yeah.
one way that I'm personally kind of trying to tackle it.
That's interesting. So it's not enough for you to invite an AI note taker to a call and then send the transcript to someone.
Now, it certainly could bring an AI note taker along, right? But that's one thing to have an AI note taker and then to digest the notes, right, later. It's
Mm.
another to be there and listen to yourself, right? So it's how do you pair multiple different things together to help someone along a learning journey?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good bridge to you, Kyle, and a curiosity I had when I saw your title, Future of HR Leader. I'm interested what an actual week uh, that you work looks like, including maybe the academy you run for the Next Gen CHROs, just for folks to get a sense. What is it that you're doing weekly basis, day to day?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to maybe elaborate for the kind of description of the role, it means I'm responsible for all of Deloitte's HR advisory services to CHROs, HR leadership teams, business leaders on where is the function headed, right? What does the HR operating model look like? The service delivery model, HR technology strategy. How is AI impacting work in the function? How does HR continue to transform itself in service of driving, value creation for the business? So that means I need to stay up on all the trends impacting enterprises in the world of work. What does that
Yeah.
mean for HR's role in helping enterprises navigate those trends and what it means for itself, right? And there's a bunch of industry sector nuance to that as well, right? Like how things are playing out in healthcare is different than retail, is different than software companies, right? So in a given week, it'll look, something along the following. Usually there's somewhere in the range of 3 to 5 different CHRO meetings or HR leadership team meetings. For example, last week I was invited to go speak at an HR offsite that included 75 professionals, right?
Hmm.
To come in and specifically talk about uh, macro market trends, right? So broader than just AI.
Mm.
What does that mean specifically for the HR function? And then facilitate them through some activities and exercises to help say, knowing these trends in the world of work, what are some, smart bets that you as a company need to make to continue to advance and evolve your own initiatives to support the business, right? So there might be something like that. There might be some sitting down with team, doing dedicated. What's the latest research and sensing that we're seeing in the market that we think is important for us and our teams to know to be able to advise our clients accordingly, and that we think our clients should know about. And then there's some
Yeah.
combination of like actually sitting down with clients on, project delivery, project execution, right? Deloitte is a professional services firm. So we're engaged with
Yeah.
some of our clients' most challenging issues and topics. And me being able to sit there and help CHROs be confident and comfortable in the decisions that they're making based on everything we're seeing in the market is an important part of us continue to deliver on our role in the ecosystem.
Yeah. Cool. And in that market, we see a lot of quotes today, like there's never been a better time to be in HR, or this AI transformation is really people transformation opportunity for HR to have a seat at the table. On the other hand, I've seen pieces where you note that there's nothing being asked of HR right now that hasn't been asked before, more of like a counterweight to this is unique momentum kind of arguments. Can you reconcile those two views?
Yeah. So the term strategic HR was coined in the 80s, right?
Hmm.
And so essentially you could look at every decade and say there is some market trend happening that some set of voices are saying, "Hey HR, you need to be strategic in relation to that topic." Right? And so if you don't know that topic and understand that topic, which the enterprise is cares about, is responding to, then you're not being strategic, right?
Mm.
So you need to lead on that topic, and that's how you be strategic, right? So it's almost, if you were to have taken a definition of what did strategic HR mean in the 80s at the time that it was coined, and fast forward to now, we'd say, of course, HR professionals are strategic against the topics of the 80s, right?
Mm.
But in the topics of 2020s, right, there's a whole different set of things that are expected in terms of how a leader needs to show up on a set of topics and what they need to know. And some of that I actually think is, I think HR as a function often gets a little bit of a peanut butter spread reputation, right? Because what is it? It's a function that focuses on the workforce, the people. And so you have many leaders in other functions who think they are great people leaders,
Mm.
who look at the HR function and say, I can do that. When in
Yeah.
fact, you have to understand the compliance requirements and all the geographies that a company might operate in that are important. You have to understand the intricacies of certain certain facets of the hire to retire life cycle and how they link together, right? Et cetera. No one questions the CFO for their financial acumen. No one questions the CIO for their technical acumen, right? But oftentimes there's questioning of the CHRO on their acumen of things that perhaps shouldn't be questioned because people think that there's this if I'm a good people leader, I've got it. Now, I'll take all of that and acknowledge, right, that AI and the capabilities of AI, it's just impacting strategy work at large, right?
Mm.
So it's easier than ever to get an answer at your fingertips on a wider array of topics, right? This actually goes back to how I answered that, knowledge transfer question, right? Just
Mm.
because all of a sudden I might be a business leader and I can query my favorite AI tool for an answer in the HR domain doesn't mean all of a sudden that I have experience with using that information to make a decision, to roll it out, to understand what are all the implications and trade-offs, right? What did I not see? Have I seen this before and lived it, right? So there's a whole host of things that I think are, really important relative to balancing out what it means to show up as a business executive, right? Regardless of function, and what it means to be a strategic business executive, regardless of function, in the context of how AI capabilities and tools get used today.
Yeah. Yeah. So regarding the nothing has ever been asked that hasn't been asked before, your argument was HR has always been asked or been expected to be strategic, and it's still the case. Even though some people leaders might be skeptical of that because they think, I can do this too as people management, right? So
Yeah, I mean, if you try to boil it down to set topics, right? What is being asked is understand this technology trend, understand the implications of said technology trend on the workforce, understand what that might mean from an org design or a workforce planning or a talent pool hiring in, right? And how do we continue to adjust the culture of the company, incentivize people, recognize them, learn, develop, reskill, redeploy, right?
yeah,
That is a set of activities, right? And you are having to adjust and respond to trends in the market, right? So it's the same set of activities, the same need to adjust and respond to trends in the market. It's just what you are adjusting and responding to is changing, right?
yeah, yeah,
A decade ago, it was something else. A decade before that, it was something else. A decade from now, it will be something else, probably even much faster, right?
mm,
So in that sense, I think like what is expected is nothing that hasn't been asked of HR before. But I will certainly acknowledge when I engage with CHRs and HR functions in the market, um, and this ties a little bit to the HR Reimagined point of view that we published. There's, I would say, almost kind of three uh, types of HR functions I've seen. Right,
mm-hmm,
one, the company just asked HR to do the basics,
yeah,
keep us compliant, pay people, provide benefits. That's it, right? And that's fine, right? There's no right or wrong because this should presumably have tied to their business strategy and their culture. So that company presumably did not invest significantly in the CHRO role or the HR function relative to technology or skills and capabilities of the function, right?
mm-hmm,
So that type of HR function is probably just going to continue doing the basics, right? And that's fine. Some other role at that enterprise is going to lead on AI and workforce transformation.
yeah,
Then there's a second tranche of companies where the HR function has received some investment, right? But that's probably tied to business cyclicality, right? Business is good. Company invests in the corporate functions, right? Finance, IT, HR, others, right? And they have the opportunity to make some growth plays and bets. Business struggles. What happens? One of the first things is probably a cost reduction in the corporate functions, right?
yeah,
So, HR, like the others, starts to make some cuts. So that type of kind of back and forth from a business investment perspective, leads to one type of HR function. And there's a third where the CEO, the C-suite, the board have always known and expected that a strong CHRO, a highly capable HR function can drive incredible business value.
mm,
And those CHRO roles and functions received investment, right? And capability building, right? And they didn't just have seats at the table, they co-led the table or whatever it might have looked like, right?
yeah,
And we see examples in the market now, right, of companies who have CHROs that are very visible and active, right? We've seen a few folks who have been in CHRO roles who've gone on to CEO or a COO or a CAO or other types of things. We've seen examples in the last couple of years of where CHROs are now actually having other scope fall under their remit,
mm-hmm,
whether that's a couple of high profile, IT technology teams folding under the CHRO role, whether that's, HR starting to own facilities or contingent worker or other, right? But
yeah,
that's kind of like three tranches of kind of HR functions, right? And that's where I think it's hard to make this broad sweeping statement of HRB strategic because there's
yeah,
a lot of nuance to where the businesses are.
yeah. I like that those three types of HR, and I wonder because uh, in a lot of aspects of my current role, I have to assemble communities of HR leaders to learn on how workforce intelligence or task intelligence gets incorporated in organizations. And one of our previous guests who used to lead HR at ABN AMRO, Frank, he said that, or it was Patrick, his colleague, he said that the HR function is is very prone to social dynamics. Look at other of their peers, how they're doing it. Try to steal a little bit away from that and implement in their own playbook. So, do you see patterns in which type of industries belong in which buckets? And if so, what are those patterns? Do you see other patterns too? I'm curious to hear about that.
Yeah, I would say I have seen some patterns in the past, inclusive of some happening right now, right? So I'll start certainly with CHROs who are having to lead from the front on the topic of AI impacts to the workforce. Kind of the first tranche of highly visible CHROs came from software companies.
Yeah.
Why? Because those are the companies that are producing the tools that are other companies are buying, right, to affect the same type of change. So you've seen this customer zero story of many people saying, "Here's how we're using the software internally. Here's what we're doing to our HR function or to our workforce." That becomes lessons learned for their customers or prospects, right? And a number of those CHROs have also published playbooks, right?
Yeah.
To kind of help others learn as well. I think then secondarily, where I've seen some other companies kind of leading from the front are industries or sectors where there's a history of investing in AI and artificial intelligence capabilities, right? Setting aside generative or agentic, but just that history into the
Mm-hmm.
core business, right? Like life sciences and research and development on drugs, right?
Yeah.
Financial services and using AI for fraud detection, in their core business, right? So there's a history of using AI in the work, right? And now as it's expanded into a wider swath of the workforce, right? Those organizations are certainly leaning into it, right?
Mm.
And there's some nuance there relative to the speed that they can move if the industry is highly regulated or not, right? And there's some nuance relative to the global footprint of the company, right? Because there are many, I think there are actually more regulations either drafted or being discussed around the world tied to AI than ever before, right? The EU has an AI Act that's coming, although I know the date and timing of when some of the enforcement happens is shifting a little bit. In various countries, like at the U.S., even down to the state level, right? There's different
Mm.
AI things that are contemplated in California and New York, for example, versus some other states. So there's a lot of nuance to that. Now,
Yeah.
on the other end of the spectrum, briefly, relative to where there might be some organizations taking a little bit more of a measured approach, right? You think, for example, uh, certain capital intensive businesses like mining, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got a significant capital outlay tied to a very physical thing, right? You're probably not in a rush to, for example, agentify HR or marketing or finance for that matter, because that's not your core business, right? That's probably a rounding error relative to value creation
Yeah.
relative to the main business. I met with a CHRO a few months ago of a major airline who's like, our big focus in the workforce is our pilots and flight attendants and the things that make our planes go, right? Our
Yeah.
corporate functions are less of a priority of immediate term investment, right? So that's where I think it's important to understand the kind of nuance of industry, sector, regulated, is it not, and what does the workforce footprint look like?
Yeah. Yeah. And as companies cope with all this change, you've argued that the destination is like what Peter Hinson also calls like the never normal,
Yep.
like it's ever changing. So you need to be adaptive. And we've also had other people on this podcast say that maybe it's a more interesting metric instead of planning your workforce X years out. It's more interesting to track learning agility as an organization, just to see how quickly you adapt. I'm curious to hear if you have a story from a company you've worked with where this is being applied in a very smart way and where that adaptability is really exemplar.
Yeah. Well, I'll acknowledge. maybe like any good professional services firm does, that 2 years in a row we've created some words. In 2025, in our Human Capital Trends report, we created a word stagility, which was the combination of stability and agility, because we saw in 2025 in our data, which was several thousand respondents. It's like 70, 80 plus countries, and we split the data between leaders and workers. That in 2025, 75% of workers wanted more stability because of all the change happening in organizations, big change.
Mm.
85% of executives wanted more agile teams, right?
Yeah.
And that feels like it's in conflict. But in essence, our call to action was executives should help workers find stability in being agile, right? Acknowledging, like, you said, Peter, the never normal, right? There is no world where change and transformation isn't always happening, right? And to grow is part of the human condition, right? So by nature, we are always growing and changing on a daily basis, right? So in our 2026 trends report, we dug into that more, right?
Mm.
And part of it, and the term we used this year was changefulness, right? And it
Yeah.
was acknowledging the difference in how organizations tend to approach this, which is you create a change program or a change initiative, you roll out a set of things, and then you say you're done, right? Versus a change capability, which is the muscle that says, this is daily, every day,
Mm.
every week. We are adapting, we are changing, we're adjusting, we're evolving, right? Um, and so to your question on, like, companies that have made the shift, I would say right now, there are probably several that I have seen, because and I would say this also mirrors the change in the um, narrative over the last 12 to 18 months around the topic of AI and automation, where 12 to 18 months ago was all about like the features. And then the narrative became, this is a people problem. This is a human problem. We will only move as fast as trust, or fast as organization culture, et cetera. So what are some very tangible things I see companies doing? Number one, acknowledging that a lot of this starts with the leaders. So on a weekly basis, in like, hey, I've got a team stand up. The leader is sharing, here's how I'm using AI, right? Or
Yeah.
having the team members show up and demonstrate how they're using AI, right? Number two, how they're then changing how they reward and recognize and incentivize that, right? Helping people get comfortable with using the tools, or doing something different, even if that leads to a failure, right? But still
Mm.
recognizing, acknowledging, creating some of that psychological safety, right? Number three, is maybe even like a step further, where I've seen some organizations invest in standing up like a mini dedicated team focused on workforce transformation, right?
Yeah.
To say, we're going to have this team and these people and these capabilities, and they're going to help us go faster. And we acknowledge all the other work that everyone else is doing is important to running the business. And we don't want you to have to try to run the business and transform the business at the same time, right? But now this transform the business team is going to help us move faster, and that's going to feed back into the run the business, and we're going to get into a little virtuous cycle here, right? So those are a few examples of where I've seen like companies begin to make that shift and to change as a capability, right? Because it acknowledges that this is not a one and done effort, versus treating it like a program, right? Which is kind of a bounded, time bound activity.
Yeah. And on the other side of this, there's this other stat from the 2026 Global Human Capital Trends Report that says 42% of workers say their organization is not evaluating AI's impact on people at all. I'm curious what message is in there for CHROs listening to this, recognizing maybe some of these percentages in their own employee survey reports, and maybe curious for your advice. Where do they start to deal with this week, next week? So yeah, curious to hear about that.
Yeah, well, and to give folks context, on the question, right? So 42% of workers say their organization is not evaluating AI's impact on people. This is what workers are seeing or hearing or interpreting when AI initiatives are launched at their companies, right? And that could be something as like saying, "Hey, everyone, we've rolled out this new AI tool, use it, right? Or hey,
Mm.
we've stood up an AI governance council or whatever. But if workers aren't seeing messaging that's like, uh, if you use this tool, we expect X number of hours of productivity gain, or we expect these types of activities to change, or um, as AI starts doing this work, here's where we expect you should work, right? The
Yeah.
messaging is not always as explicit, right? Which is where I think people are saying, my organization's not evaluating AI's impact on people, whether or not that evaluation might have happened in another room and it just was never told, right? And so people read headlines, right? They read headlines and then they look at an initiative and then they think, what does this mean for me? And if you can't answer questions like, if I use the tool, am I going to get a bigger bonus? Am I going to get promoted faster? Right? What's in it for me as an individual?
Mm.
So there's a few things, when I work with CHROs on this particular topic that I suggest, right? Uh, Number one, you need to be explicit to your workforce on where you see their roles headed, right? At Deloitte, we've used a framework, and it's available via our HR Reimagined point of view to talk about work that is AI assisted, augmented, and powered, right?
Yeah.
Meaning, as you think about the work of today to the work of tomorrow, how's the work changing, right? If it's AI assisted, means there's still going to be a lot of human to human interaction, right? You think salespeople talking to customers, HR business partners talking to leaders and managers, right? AI is going to help them do it faster, better, different. AI powered means work today that's done by humans, tomorrow is going to be done a lot by AI and automation, and the work of the humans will change, right? And by the way, I know, Tech Wolf, with what you all launched, gosh, several months ago, right? You have some of that AI and automation data available to, your customers, and also available for folks to kind of browse, for free.
Mhm.
So there's plenty of data available to help understand where are roles at any individual company fitting into AI assisted, augmented, and powered. And
Yeah.
so if you tell your workforce which role you fall in, all of a sudden you're giving them a path, right? So if I, Kyle, am told I'm in an AI powered role and the company thinks in the next, 12 to 18 months, my role is going to shift fundamentally, I'm now given clarity. I'm invited into the design process or the redesign process potentially. And I know if I learn maybe on the other side of that 12 to 18 months, I'll just be in a newer, different role, right? So I think that's one thing that CHROs should be doing is identifying where the roles of their company fit into those buckets and telling the workforce. And then I think secondly, one of the things that I think everyone's trying to acknowledge and tackle is how do you avoid just layering AI and automation capabilities on of existing processes, right? Instead, and this is where there's been the return of the first principles approach some folks have used. We started using a zero-based work framing, borrowing kind of the zero-based budget concept from finance and apply it to zero-based work to say, if I take all the work off the table and I assign it a value and start to put it back in, I should be asking, should this work exist? If yes, where's the highest value creation? Is it AI doing it? Is a human doing it? Is it a combination thereof? So like who or what should do the work? And then how should it be done? Right.
Yep.
So if you start asking those questions, it gives people kind of freedom to really kind of dig in and say, what is the right way to maybe take best advantage of human and machine capabilities to drive exponential value for the organization?
Yeah. And you're right, like this role redesign use case seems to be like the prime use case to start using task intelligence, analyzing work to then ultimately go to workflow optimization as well,
Yep.
and not staying at like superficial just roles or tasks. And this also brings me to then leaders reimagining certain functions that they should change. And in the same report, uh, you noted that 66% of C-suite leaders say traditional functions, HR, finance, legal, must change, but only 7% say they are making progress. Do you have any explanation on what's holding the 93% back?
Yeah. To give a little additional context there, we had a whole trend digging into, we called it have corporate functions outlive their function, right? So
Yeah.
if you were starting a business again today, would you start with the same set of functions that have grown up over time, right? And there was another data point from our human capital trends report that said 70% of business leaders, their strategy over the next 3 years is to be fast and nimble. And
Uh-huh.
so this gets into the what's holding people back, right? One, most organizational functions, most organizations were not designed for speed, right?
Yeah.
They were designed for something else, whether that is efficiency, whether that is compliance with regulatory requirements or the industry that they work in. It wasn't a design for speed, right? So number one. Number two, there was, I think, over the last couple decades, a lot of significant specialization in functions, right? Very specialized skill sets and domain expertise, right? Um, and then number three, there is just the, I would say, culture of many companies that was to progress in your career was tied to scope ownership, number of headcount, size of team, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to really tackle this, like you're trying to address significant shifts in how leaders tackle power structures, your own identity as a leader, how you're measuring outcomes, how you're coordinating, right? Um, and I will say one of the quotes that I heard a leader share, maybe it was in the fall of 24. So like this was early days, but it was essentially the leaders who are going to be the best at navigating through this moment in time are going to be the ones who do not wrap their arms around and try to hold things tight. They're going to
Mm-hmm.
open their arms and say, we are willing to share. We're willing to give up or disrupt our space, because in doing so, they are most likely to be at the forefront of designing what's ahead, right? And being able to be the ones who are the leaders of the future, right? So I think
Yeah.
that's a big focus of things.
And your last point leads very nicely into maybe what's holding people back to do that. That letting go or joining certain points of their mandate of their function with other functions. Because if we look at the HR function, they sit in a bit of a strange spot where it's one of the functions that must change, but also the function best placed to lead the redesign. So maybe could you reflect a bit on what an HR leader might think it costs to lead a redesign that includes their own job description? Because and I'm sure HR is not alone in this.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah. Well,
that's a common objection I hear.
yeah. Well, and when you think about it, right? I know folks have always spoken about this category of like HR technology,
Yeah.
but it's probably the only category where almost all the technology is used by the entire enterprise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Employees use it, managers use it, right? It's not like this technology is only for the domain of the HR function, right? Which is different, right? When you install a CRM, right? Probably only your sales team is using it, right? Or
Yeah.
other things like that. And so some of this becomes, as you think about the HR function redesigning its work, right? There is a huge interplay with the manager role, right? And how
Yeah.
do you redesign work to equip managers with a set of data to make decisions about their people, their teams, their workforce, right? And as you redesign that work with AI and automation capabilities, potentially surfacing things, that much better into the manager role, that might have an implication for what the HR function needs to do going forward, right? Um, but at the same time, I think we all know, again, I said it earlier, right? We're dealing with humans in an enterprise. We're never going to have an organization that has 100% people leaders, managers who are the best people leaders in the world, right? There's always going to be some individual capability.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, some of this becomes, what are the right capabilities for HR functions to invest in that allows them to best serve people leaders going forward, right? To make sure that those people leaders are doing the best they can for their teams and their workforce, right? And so because of that, I think HR, the ability to, redesign itself also gets credibility with those people leaders, with their managers, that understands what it takes to redesign, and therefore gets invited to the table to help redesign elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you run into situations like, either HR finds out after the fact, or some other way in which it's like someone else is leading and owning the redesign process. And I think
Mm.
what we have generally seen and learned of the last 12 to 18 months of good, effective redesign requires a cross-functional set of stakeholders there. So you don't want to get into a situation where you're trying to redesign without someone from the HR team, at the table.
Yeah. Okay. And you mentioning the HR tech element, unique piece of software often covers the entire organization. There's a lot of it's like still a bit of a wild west market, maybe the HR tech market. A lot of dust continuously settling with new announcements of new vendors. I'd love to ask a little bit to switch on your BS radar here and advise our listeners when they and this goes back to the 2025 report on HR Reimagined Agentic AI for HR. What is the test you run on a vendor demo to decide whether you're looking at a real agent, the word most often dropped at these global conferences, or a workflow with a chat interface, right?
Yep. Yeah. 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 Um, so most simply is getting below the hood of the demo, right?
Okay.
Because it's one thing to always have a nice demo set up, and it's another to actually show, okay, what decisions can this agent make without human involvement, right? If set up properly, right? What actions can it take, right? Walk me through the process of understanding when how does it detect that it needs to do something? How does it plan what action to take based on the data available, right? How does that initiate, taking the actions? And at the end, how does it learn, right? So you need that learning loop to actually have something that is truly agentic, right? Because now it's got the ability to have gone from detection through initiation, planning, initiation, taking an action, and then learning at the end. So that gets into very specific questions around what are the memory capabilities? How does the technology, how does the agent learn? And where are the tool integrations, right? So that the agent can go from this system to that system, or this system to engage with another agent right along the way to truly have an end-to-end agentic workflow.
Yeah. Super helpful. I think some of the people will maybe try and adapt their questions to put the next vendor they meet on the spot. Hopefully, maybe us. um, another topic then is around the CHRO role, and this is especially something I'd love to cover with you, given the Next Generation CHRO Academy. I've asked a few of the previous guests about the CHRO role, but if you had to pick the single thing this generation of aspiring CHROs needs to learn that the current generation did not, what would it be? And this also goes to a bit a prediction around what does a CHRO role look like in 2030, right?
Yeah. So I think, and this is where we started to see a few of the CHROs who are beginning to, own more inclusive of kind of the technology space. Um, I think the single thing that this generation is going to need to learn or know or show up competently on is a deeper level of technical fluency
Mm-hmm.
than the prior generation. But I will also say I think that's true for every C-suite role, right?
Yeah.
Technology is no longer only just the domain of IT, right? Or a CIO or a chief technology officer, right? Like CFOs have to understand AI related to tokens, right? 6 months ago, we weren't talking about token economics, right? Now we are. Well, you can't be a CFO who doesn't understand AI and the technology to credibly weigh in on that, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with CHROs, right? So I think that depth of technical expertise is something that CHROs need to understand in a way going forward than the profession has probably ever been asked to do.
Yeah. And maybe to then pull it broader towards HR in general, what kind of leaders are CHROs then looking to hire within their function? Because I see more and more moves of maybe my feed is biased too, but of job postings around some kind of skills COE or work intelligence roles. And I'm also always keen to learn like how are the functions then changing in general? If it's true that CHROs need to become more tech savvy, do they expect the same of the teams that they're going to hire?
Yeah. So I've seen a few things relative to kind of specific skills. Uh, More like statistical data analysis backgrounds, right? To really dig in on this workforce intelligence, understanding of AI impact on work. What does that mean to skills, org design, workforce planning?
Yeah.
Um, you've seen a kind of a call for systems thinkers, right? Relative to people who understand work as an end-to-end, process system. You got to understand all these different trade-offs and considerations to tie to it, and where things go from there. Now, I think the third thing, which is a bit more broader, not a specific skill, but actually ties into talent development at organizations, an acknowledgement that organizations are shifting from like the T-shaped, right,
Yeah.
deep in one domain, broad across others, to the M-shaped, right, the ability to go deep in multiple domains, right?
Mm.
So that wasn't always the skill or capability building path for people. Some people did that unintentionally through their careers or intentionally. But
Yeah.
that type of intentional leadership rotation programs, development programs, apprenticeship models, you name it, like that's coming back into play, I think, in significant ways.
Yeah. Cool. My one but last question is around, and this especially a good one for you because you scour for HR trends all the time. You must see also a couple of things that are, in hindsight, a bit overhyped. So, what would you advise your listeners to push back on when they hear a certain phrase in HR and AI space that you would be skeptical about? Is there anything that you've seen recently that you're like, I see this a lot? I would urge people to push back on this.
What I would urge folks to push back on is pre-built agents.
Okay.
What I mean by that is uh, every vendor is wanting to make it easy to get technology implemented. And
Yeah.
there are things that certainly can be done to help with that, right? Hence the pre-built or out of the box, right? But you then have to factor for every individual company. What are the countries that I work in and the regulatory requirements I have to abide by? What's my workforce mix? What's my business strategy? What's my company culture? What is my technology architecture, right? And there's no way a pre-built agent can factor in all those things, right?
Yeah.
So you need to be ready to acknowledge that there still will be work to be done to get a pre-built agent or an out-of-the-box agent to operate effectively within your environment, right?
Mm.
So just know that all parts of the ecosystem want to make it helpful, impactful, successful, right? To get to a better quality outcome that much faster, right? But a pre-built thing in and of itself is not going to be like a flip the switch and you're done.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good shout. That's a good shout. And then my last question, and you might know what's coming, Kyle, is to ask my next guest a question you're curious about, and I actually already know who it's going to be. So I'm going to interview him this week in London. It's going to be Ian Bailey from Synopsys. maybe someone you know, TechWolf customer. So off the top of your head, anything you're curious to ask him?
Yeah, I have had the pleasure of getting to know Ian. It's going to be a tremendous interview, so I hope folks listen and enjoy. And Ian, hello, proactively. Um, I think a question that I would ask Ian, knowing a little bit of what he's navigated over the last couple of years, is how would Ian suggest in this moment in time for HR professionals to go create those cross-functional teams of HR, IT, finance, right? To get them working together to begin driving an outcome, right? Because I know the environment that he's worked in has been dynamic over the last couple of years. And I know part of his success has been doing that, but I know that's often a challenging place for other organizations to start.
Let's see how he rolls with that. I'll make sure to get the answer to you, and the question Ian will for sure be able to hear himself. So then nothing left for me to say, but thank you, Kyle, for making time in your busy schedule, calling all the way to Ghent, Belgium, and I hope we do this again.
Absolutely awesome. Thanks for having me, Julius, and thanks to the TechWolf team.